Hello, this is Danielle Ireland, and you are listening to Don't Cut Your Own Bangs, a solo cast. And today I want to explore healing, specifically as it relates to emotional healing, emotional recovery, and emotional work. So basically, about a week or so ago, I had a client who I'd been seeing for, I think I want to say like 4 months, 5 months. They'd been in it long enough that they really got a sense for what, therapy was, and they were starting to make some connections, and it was feeling really good. And she just had a very natural, reasonable question, which was like, how do you know when you're done? And so we talked about that for a little bit. And what came out of that for me was she really wanted to know, well, how do I know when I've healed what I need to heal? Or how do I know when I've really made progress? And, I think the short answer to that, which I've explored a little bit in some of my social media content this week, is that the less activated, worked up, and by activated, I mean like an emotion like frustration, anger, sadness. Another way of thinking of activated or being activated can also be loosely linked to being triggered. I think I've heard a lot of people casually use the word triggered to kind of articulate, oh, I'm really upset about something, or this is a really triggering moment. A trigger is more often associated with trauma and a post-traumatic stress response. Activated or feel an emotion feeling activated, I think if you were to think of it like in a gradient scale of 0 to 10, a level 10 activation could be considered a trigger. But when I'm talking about activated here in this context, in this podcast, what I'm really meaning is, thinking about maybe a situation in high school where someone bullied you, or maybe not even bullied, but just was unkind to you, and thinking about that person, or maybe seeing their name cross your social media, you're like, oh, that's so-and-so, you just start getting all worked up about it. Or, maybe, a friend or a family member makes a joke about something from childhood, and you're like, oh man, like that sucks. Like, I hate thinking about that. So it's a heightened emotional response. For me, when I'm activated, it's like I can't put it down. I can't put the situation down. I can't put the thought down. And so I was really trying to think for this, like, what would be a good example from my life where I've recently been activated, or what was a recent experience of healing? Because I think we know we want to feel better, whether we're starting therapy, whether we're starting journaling, whether we're doing any form of self-help work. We know we want to feel better, but the process is a little different in terms of how we identify what we need and how we measure progress than, say, like a weight loss goal or a fitness goal. Because you can say, I want to be this pant size, or I want to be this weight in X amount of months. And that is a little bit harder to codify or define when it comes to emotional processes or emotional work. And so this idea of healing as it relates to how activated or how unactivated you are, the story that came to mind is actually fairly recent. So a few months ago, I was working with a client, and I just want to apologize in advance. I'm going to have to be vague about some of the details about this particular case to protect the client relationship. So if you've listened to my podcast before, you know that I don't have a problem sharing details about my own personal life, but this is the best example I could think of. It just happens to involve a client. So, pardon the vagueness, but I think the point will still get across. So a couple months ago, I was working with a client, and they were a couple, and I found myself really struggling with one person in this couple dynamic. And by struggling, what I mean is that I could feel myself get worked up in the session, and not in the way of not worked up and as in like I would get involved in their argument, but I could just physically feel my body responding to what was happening in the room. I could feel myself perspire. I could feel kind of some tightness in my abdomen and in between my solar plexus. I found myself almost more leaning up, leaning forward, leaning in. Like I wanted to get more involved than would be probably appropriate or necessary in a therapeutic setting. So that was my first clue that something was going on within me and something was happening in this room, but I wasn't clear on what it was. And then what I found, and this is not my best quality, but it's just the truth, that when I find myself, I'm not going to try to dress up the language to make it sound better than what it is. When I find myself complaining about someone, or I find myself repeating the same story of this is what they did and it was so frustrating, or, oh, they're so irritating, or, oh, they just don't get it. When I find myself kind of tipping into a critical space, or a complaining space or a judgmental space, that I'm becoming increasingly more aware is an indication that something is being activated in me. Something's going on within me that I need to pay attention to. But I didn't catch that for about the first week. And so, I would, on my drive home from work, I would think about this situation, or I would think about the session that I've had with this particular person. And I would repeat it and I would replay it in my mind. And I would either replay exactly what happened in the room, and I would focus on the parts that upset me or that I didn't like or that frustrated me. Or what I would do is I would sort of fantasize about what I wish I would have said, or, oh, this could have been a better thing to say, but I just sort of ruminate on it, and it just swirls and swirls and swirls. And even though I understand this logically, logic never gets me out of my own work. It doesn't get anyone out of their own work. My body was reliving the stress that I felt in the room at the time of this particular session. And so, I'm thinking about it in the car when I get home, and my husband's home. Obviously, I can't share with him names or details of cases and clients, but I was saying things to him like, oh my God, you're not going to believe, like this person was so irritating, and just giving loose context. Or I would call therapists, for anyone who doesn't know, we can sometimes, or we often need, and many times early on in your career, it's required to have what's called supervision. It's a little bit different than like a manager, an employee type supervision. It's more an opportunity to bounce ideas for cases off one another. So you're seeing someone presumably who's been in the field longer than you, or has a different point of view, a different perspective, maybe a different area of training or focus, or it could even just be a peer. But it's a safe space where you can use, first names, and you can get into more depth about the case, the client, what's coming up for you, what might be coming up within the room, like what are you observing in the room? And it helps you kind of get fresh new eyes on, or a fresh new take on how to approach the client in the next appointment. But I was using that time to more air my own frustration, my own irritation. And I was just really fixated on how frustrated I was and how much, I'm using air quotes right now, how much they weren't getting it. And I just want to say that's not the role of a therapist in my view. It's not my job to help a client, quote unquote, get it, because it's not my therapy. But what was becoming increasingly clear to me, and what was being reflected back to me by the therapist that I was sharing this with and having supervision with, and then eventually I'll get to some feedback that my own therapist gave me, was that I was getting overly invested in this client's recovery. I was working a lot harder than they were. And I was also making the work about me through my own frustration. Like I needed them to get something they weren't getting, which may have nothing to do with what they need or what they needed from me. And so that was probably about a week after having this kind of activating session. And so I've had a week to sort of chew on it, mull on it. It's been swirling around. I've been talking about it, venting about it. And then I had a session with my therapist, and he very accurately and astutely asked, okay, well, what is this dynamic reminding you of from your own life, or who does this person remind you of? And as soon as he asked that question, which is why we really can't therapize ourselves, as soon as he asked that question, I just, my whole body deep sighed with that knowingness of, son of a bitch. It's my own work I have to do. No, I wanted it to be about the client. I wanted it to be that the client wasn't getting it. The client was irritating, that, it was their fault. It was their problem, not mine. When my activated emotions kind of get caught red-handed, I then start to, I think, turn into a little bit of an emotional teenager. I was like, oh God, this is so stupid. This whole thing is stupid. I don't even think I need this anymore. Like, this whole process is dumb. I just get really, I'm not at my best. And thankfully, because I trust the process, I trust my therapist, I've been on the other side of this. I thankfully was self-aware enough to know, okay, this means there's work I need to do here. And so we did. We talked about, okay, this is the memory that's coming up for me in the room. These are the situations, the dynamics, the relationships that are being reflected back from my own history that have nothing to do with this client or who this person is. And once I was able to identify that within myself, I got very tired because I don't know what the experience is like for all people, but for me, it's like when I unearth some junk that I need to kind of dust off and look at, understand, and then try to make sense of. It's tiring. I mean, sometimes it can be exhausting. It's not always exhausting. This particular time, though, it was. I was really tired, but it was also I was tired, but my mind was quiet. It was like the noise stopped, the chatter slowed down. And upon hindsight and reflecting back, I think that was an indication to me that some healing had taken place. I felt that relief and exhaustion kind of wrapped up in one. And if I think about what healing means for me or what I've seen in other people, I think it often does come in a similar type package where first there's the recognition, then there's the, oh, no, like, please not this, because you can't unknow what you know. You can't unsee what you see. And so when the truth is reflected back to you, and not in a confrontational way or not in an antagonistic way, just this is a deeper truth within you. When that's reflected back to you, your body, at least my body, has a physical response. And then there's a subtle shift that can feel like relief. But I think it's always humbling and helpful for me even to remember that the process of healing or healing work does not always feel good. And it doesn't always initially feel better. And I've talked on here a lot about journaling and the value of journaling to help kind of further and continue this healing work. And so I actually found, and I was able to pull an excerpt from my journal the day after my therapy session that I just referenced. And I was thinking about, at the time, not to read the entire entry because there's a lot of rambling and run-on sentences, but this particular section, I talk about, I'm more kind of processing what this new understanding means. So here it goes. Learning or understanding something logically never lifts you out of your own knowing. I thought that I could avoid my unknowing by learning and becoming a therapist. I thought I could hijack my process by getting the skills and doing the work and helping others, and somehow, I think subconsciously, thinking that I could avoid doing my own work myself. No book, teacher, training, or a license could ever keep me from doing the real work or protect me from the discomfort of being responsible to discover the work for myself. Again, you can hear it's a little rambly. And then I use this example, and bear with me, but I'm just going to be real here. It would be like only knowing Paris from movies and pictures, but the feel of the cobblestone streets, the crackle of the bread, the sweetness of the wine, it had to be experienced by me. So to bring it back to healing and what it means to heal, what that process looks like, and then how do you know when you've done it? So I wish I had the perfect sort of encapsulated definition for you of what that would look like. I would love to have it, but I can tell you, kind of bookend this story or this example with the client and how it all kind of jumbled up inside. I had a couple of sessions with them in the weeks that followed this sort of week-long healing processing journey for me. And it didn't actually occur to me until this past weekend. So these sessions have come and gone. It didn't occur to me until after, which is maybe the gift of hindsight. I wasn't activated. didn't pit out my shirts when the session was over. I wasn't, wiping sweat from my upper lip. I didn't have that knot in my stomach from kind of restricting my breath. I smiled and laughed a little bit. And interestingly, what I was feeling in myself, I actually observed in them. And I'm still kind of processing what that might mean, because I think there's no denying that whatever I'm feeling internally, it would be silly for me to think that someone else may not be feeling that too. That edginess, that prickliness, that activation, whatever that thing is. And they were laughing a little bit more. I was laughing a little bit more. It felt a little bit like a tension bubble had burst. And then flash forward to today, and thinking about it, with the most honesty and sincerity that I can possibly muster in this moment, I didn't give their sessions afterward any more thought. I didn't come home and want to talk about it. I have had a couple of supervision sessions with some therapists that I trust and that I have great relationships with, and I didn't feel the need to process anything with them. It didn't feel like there was anything left to resolved or anything left unresolved. And so to really wrap it up with, how do you know when you're done? And how do you know when you've done the healing work? I guess what I understand so far is that I don't know if I'm done with the core root of whatever that lesson was, but that situation, I think, feels pretty healed in me when I think about it, when I imagine it, when I kind of close my eyes and think about this person and this work. My body doesn't have a response. It's sort of a neutral response. I hope that as you're listening along and listening through, that one of the things I really hope that you can take away from this is that the healing journey is a journey. Maybe a better word is a process. It is a process. And I hope for you, because I hope for myself, that God, we get to that destination where we just feel better and we interact with people in a more open and compassionate and loving way, and that we can live and let things roll off our back. I hope that we all get there. But more often than not, for me anyway, it's more like the same healing work is done. I just get new teachers. The opportunities to learn the lesson and the opportunities to heal are presented and reflected back to me through different teachers. That could be different relationships. It could be from people. It could be from the media. It could be from social media. It could be from a project. But I feel, at least in this way, a little relieved, a little better, and hopefully maybe further down the road, when I've got a little bit more time and distance, I can look back and say, oh, this is clearly the lesson that I learned. I don't even know if I can articulate that for you now. But what I do know is that I feel better. And that's really all we can hope for. So I want to thank you so much for joining me on this solo cast, this episode of Don't Cut Your Own Bangs. As always, your time and your intention, they are the most precious assets we all have. And the fact that you're sharing it with me here, and we're in this conversation and in this space together, I cherish it so deeply. And I thank you for that.